Elena Brooks stepped out of the car in front of the sprawling Dallas mansion, where warm golden lights wrapped the evening in a picture-perfect Thanksgiving glow. Inside, the laughter and chatter of more than 40 relatives and business partners filled the air, creating what seemed like a flawless atmosphere. But the moment the door opened, Elena felt something was off. Eyes drifted toward her. Not exactly hostile, but far from welcoming. Patricia Brooks, her mother-in-law, stood at the center of the room, elegant and commanding as always. She smiled, but not at Elena. Ryan gave her hand a gentle squeeze, a quiet attempt at reassurance. But Elena knew that small gesture wasn't enough to hide the growing distance between her and this family. This wasn't the first time she had felt like an outsider. It was just that this time, something in the air told her the night wouldn't end the way it usually did. And then, when Patricia picked up the microphone in the middle of the party, everything began to change. If you want to know what happened next, comment 1 to hear the full story, because by the end, you might discover something truly meaningful about your own worth. As the room fell quiet after Patricia picked up the microphone, Elena could clearly feel the shift in everyone's gaze, from casual curiosity to focused anticipation. Patricia had always known how to turn any moment into her own stage, and tonight was no exception. Elena stood there, composed on the outside, but her mind replayed everything that had happened before. This wasn't the first time Patricia had made her the unspoken subject of these gatherings. Ever since Elena married Ryan, Patricia had never truly accepted her. In her eyes, Elena wasn't part of the family, just an unsuitable choice her son had made. Ryan could have done better, she had once said. Quiet enough that only a few people heard, but loud enough for Elena to understand. Elena's job, a data analyst in Austin, was always dismissed by Patricia. To her, it was nothing more than meaningless numbers on a screen, hardly comparable to the businesses her family had built. And what made it worse was that Ryan rarely pushed back. Not because he agreed, but because he chose silence to keep the peace. But that silence, more than anything, slowly left Elena feeling alone in her own marriage. And as Patricia began speaking her first words to the entire room, Elena knew that this time it wouldn't stop at subtle remarks anymore. Patricia continued her speech by highlighting the family's proud achievements. One by one, names were called. A cousin running a chain of gyms, another who had just launched their own company, each followed by polite rounds of applause. Elena sat there in silence. No one mentioned her, not a single word. It was as if she had never existed in that room. And in that moment of being overlooked, everything became clearer than ever. If you want to see what happens when someone has stayed silent for too long, leave a dot in the comments. The room still carried the echo of polite applause as Patricia lifted her glass, her gaze sweeping across the crowd to make sure all attention remained on her. Elena stayed seated, but this time she no longer felt uncertain. Everything was painfully clear. The silence around her wasn't accidental, it was intentional. Patricia smiled, her voice slowing, as if she were building toward something more significant than the compliments she had just given. Our family, she began, has always valued those who create real value. A few people nodded, others took quiet sips of their drinks, but no one looked away. Elena felt Ryan shift slightly beside her, as if he wanted to say something, but didn't. And in that moment, her heart sank. Not because of what was about to be said, but because she knew she would have to face it alone. Patricia set her glass down, lifted the microphone again, the light catching sharply on her face. But sometimes, she continued, her tone softer yet edged with something colder, not everyone who enters this family truly understands that. The entire room fell into an uneasy silence. No one spoke, but everyone understood exactly who she was talking about. As Patricia's words faded, a few soft chuckles rippled through the room, not loud but enough to spread across the table. No one looked directly at Elena, yet that made her the center of attention all the same. A kind of silence filled with implication, one that everyone understood. Patricia tilted her head, her smile unchanged, as if she hadn't said anything inappropriate. What I mean is, she continued, this family was built by people who know how to work, who know how to create value, not those who simply show up at the right time. One relative laughed more openly. Others exchanged glances before quickly looking away. Ryan remained silent. His hand rested on the table, but it no longer reached for Elena's. Elena felt every beat of her heart. Not because she was surprised, but because at last, the things once said behind her back were now out in the open, laid bare in front of dozens of people. No more polite disguises, no more safe distance. Patricia lifted her glass, as if she had just finished telling an innocent story. But before taking a sip, she paused for a brief moment, her eyes flicking toward Elena. Quick, yet long enough to make one thing clear. She knew exactly what she was doing. The glass in Patricia's hand still hadn't reached her lips. She lowered it slowly, as if remembering something left unsaid. The room remained wrapped in a heavy silence, and this time, no one bothered to hide their curiosity anymore. Actually, Patricia continued, her voice soft but sharper than before, I've always believed that everyone in this family has to prove their worth. She took a slow step toward the center, tightening her grip on the microphone. Not with words, she emphasized, but with what they truly create. A few people nodded, as if listening to a familiar lesson. Then Patricia let out a light laugh, her gaze settling on one exact spot where Elena sat. Because if not, she went on, then their presence is only temporary. The tension in the room snapped taut. Someone cleared their throat, another set a glass down a little too hard, but no one spoke up. Ryan took a breath, as if about to say something. Elena felt it, but like every other time, he chose silence. And in that moment, Elena understood more clearly than ever. This was no longer subtle. Patricia wasn't just implying anything. She was openly placing Elena outside the boundaries of this family, right in front of everyone. And this time, there was no way back. Patricia's words still lingered in the air, like an invisible line drawn across the room. Elena sat there, back straight, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. She could feel everyone watching. No one said a word, but they were all waiting to see how she would respond. For a brief moment, Elena considered standing up and leaving. All it would take was a polite excuse, a composed smile, and she could walk out, just like she had done before. No confrontation, no explanations, no scene. But this time, it felt different. Not because Patricia's words were harsher than usual, but because Elena realized that if she stayed silent again, that silence would become her identity in their eyes. She slowly clenched her hand under the table, then released it. Her heartbeat was still fast, but her gaze began to steady. She didn't look at Patricia right away. Instead, she looked around, at every face, every pair of eyes, either avoiding her or quietly observing. And then, she made a decision she hadn't even expected from herself. If you've ever felt looked down on, but weren't sure whether to speak up or stay silent, leave a 2 in the comments. Elena took a slow breath, then gently pushed her chair back. The soft sound was enough to make a few heads turn. She stood up, not rushed, not hesitant, just a decisive movement, as if she had been thinking about this for a long time. Ryan looked at her, surprised. Elena, he said quietly, but she didn't turn back. Not because she was angry, but because she knew that if she stopped now, she would fall into silence again. She walked toward the small table holding the projection screen, the one meant for family photos and the memorable moments Patricia had prepared. A few whispers started to ripple through the room. Patricia narrowed her eyes, her smile still in place, but her gaze had shifted. Elena set her phone down on the table, her hands steadier than she expected. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she connected her device to the large screen in the living room. A few seconds passed, long enough for curiosity to spread across the room. Then the screen lit up. Not family photos, not nostalgic videos, but a familiar interface, data tables, rows of numbers, and charts that Elena knew all too well from her work. She turned back to face everyone. Her eyes were calm now, no longer avoiding anyone. I think, Elena said, her voice clearer than ever, it's time I shared something too. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as the glow from the screen reflected across faces fixed on Elena. Rows of numbers, charts, and data tables filled the display. Not something meant for a family dinner, yet impossible to ignore. Elena didn't rush to explain. She let a few seconds pass, long enough for curiosity to tighten into tension. Then she tapped lightly on the screen and opened another file. The title appeared clearly, Brooks Hospitality, Internal Financial Access Log. A few brows furrowed. A man at the end of the table leaned in and whispered, "Is that the internal system?" Patricia was no longer smiling. Her expression froze in that exact moment, her eyes locked on the screen. Elena finally spoke. "I know tonight is a special evening," she said calmly. "So I thought everyone should see a part of the value you just mentioned." She moved to the next page. A list of access records appeared. Timestamps, IP addresses, and usernames. The last name on the list was clearly highlighted. E. Brooks, full system access. A murmur spread across the room. Not because everyone fully understood what they were seeing, but because they were beginning to realize. Elena hadn't stood up just to speak. The whispers spread across the room, but Elena didn't stop. She tapped the screen again, zooming in on the highlighted line. The pale blue light reflected across Patricia's face, now stripped of the composure she had held just moments before. "Elena, what are you doing?" Patricia asked, her voice no longer steady. Elena looked straight at her, for the first time, without looking away. "I'm just clarifying something," she replied, her tone calm and even. She switched to another screen, a full system map of Brooks Hospitality's payment network. Lines crisscrossed between nodes and access points, with one section marked in bold red. 3 months ago, Elena began, this system developed a critical security vulnerability. A few people near the screen leaned forward. Ryan frowned. Clearly, he had never heard about this. "Elena," he said quietly, but she continued. "If that vulnerability hadn't been resolved within a few hours," she said, her eyes sweeping across the room, "the entire payment system could have gone down." The atmosphere shifted instantly. The people who had been laughing earlier were now completely silent. Elena paused for a beat, then spoke again, more slowly this time, and the person who fixed it wasn't some team of experts. She looked directly at Patricia. "It was me." A heavy silence settled over the room. No more whispers, no more sidelong glances, just the unmistakable stillness on every face. Elena didn't speak right away. She let the truth she had just revealed speak for itself. Ryan turned to look at her, his expression a mix of shock and confusion. "I didn't know about this," he said quietly, almost to himself. Elena didn't blame him. She simply gave a small nod, then moved on to the next slide. A document appeared, more detailed, more official. Emergency Security Patch Authorization, Brooks Hospitality. Below it was a digital signature, authorized by P. Brooks. Patricia froze. Her eyes scanned the screen quickly as if searching for a flaw, some detail she could deny. But there wasn't one. Elena spoke again, her voice steady as ever. "That day, you approved emergency access, without carefully reading who would be executing it." A few people began to piece it together. One relative murmured, "Wait, so the person she's been talking about all this time?" Elena didn't need to say another word, because in that moment, the entire room had already started connecting the dots. Elena didn't rush to say anything more. She simply stood there, letting the truth she had revealed settle into every gaze in the room. Patricia remained silent, but this time, it wasn't control. It was hesitation, as if everything was slipping out of her grasp. Elena tapped the screen again, opening one final document, consulting agreement, external security specialist. She didn't need to explain much, she just scrolled down to the recipient's name, Elena Brooks. A few people let out audible breaths, not because they fully understood the legal details, but because they understood enough to see what was happening. "Elena," Ryan said, this time unable to hide his surprise. She turned to him, her expression still calm. "I didn't mention it before. Because I didn't think it mattered," she said softly. "Not until it became a problem in someone else's eyes." Patricia placed a hand on the table, as if steadying herself. For the first time, she didn't have an immediate response. Elena looked back at the room, her voice slower now. "I never needed anyone's approval. But if we're going to talk about value, then at least it should be based on the truth. If you've made it this far and can feel everything shifting in a way no one expected, leave a 2 in the comments, so I know you're still here, feeling this moment." No one spoke right away. But this silence was completely different. It was no longer quiet agreement, but a thoughtful pause, each person reflecting on what they had just witnessed. Elena stepped away from the screen, with no need to open another document. What needed to be said had already been said. She turned back toward the table, her gaze passing over each face, not challenging, not angry, just calm in a way that was hard to read. "I'm not someone who talks a lot," she said, her voice soft but clear. "And I've never tried to prove anything to anyone in this family." She paused for a moment, making sure she had everyone's attention. "But there's one thing I understand very clearly," Elena continued. "A person's value isn't defined by how others judge them at a dinner table." Her eyes briefly settled on Patricia, not harsh, but enough to deliver the message without saying it outright. "And if my silence ever led people to misunderstand me," she added quietly, "then today, I just wanted to make that clear. Not to win, but to put an end to how she had been seen all this time." As Elena finished speaking, the room remained still, but this time, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt more like a moment of reckoning, where people were forced to reflect, not on Elena, but on how they had perceived her all along. An older relative slowly set down his glass, no longer avoiding eye contact. Across the table, two people who had laughed along with Patricia earlier now exchanged uneasy glances, as if realizing where they had stood all evening. Ryan turned fully toward Elena. His expression had clearly changed. Not just surprise, but a quiet, delayed understanding. He opened his mouth, as if to say something, then stopped. This time, not out of avoidance, but because he knew that anything he said now wouldn't be enough. Patricia still stood there, one hand resting on the table, but she was no longer speaking, no longer controlling the room like before. She glanced at the screen once more, then at Elena. For the first time, not with judgment, but with unmistakable caution. From one corner of the room, someone murmured, "If she's the one controlling the system, then the entire restaurant chain." The sentence trailed off. It didn't need to be finished, because by now, everyone understood. Elena's place in that room had just changed. Elena didn't say another word. She stood there for a second, then gently unplugged her phone from the screen. The light faded, and the room returned to the setting of a dinner party, but the atmosphere had completely changed. She walked back to the table, pulled out her chair, and sat down as if nothing had happened. No one laughed. No one picked up the conversations they had left hanging. The glances that once brushed past her so casually now lingered longer, more carefully. Ryan looked at her, this time without avoiding her gaze. He lowered his voice. "I'm sorry." But Elena gave a slight shake of her head, not because she didn't hear him, but because she didn't need an answer right now. Across the table, Patricia finally sat down. No microphone, no controlling smile. She remained silent, her eyes revealing something that had never been there before, not anger, but realization. Elena adjusted the glass of water in front of her, a small, steady movement. She didn't look around for approval, she didn't wait for an apology, because the most important thing had already happened. It wasn't what she said, it was that from this moment on, no one in that room could ever see her the same way again. The dinner continued, but in a very different way. There were no more hushed side comments, no more subtle, judgmental glances. Everything felt quieter, as if each person was holding on to thoughts they hadn't yet found the words to say. Elena didn't leave early. She stayed seated, just as composed as when she had arrived, only this time, she no longer felt out of place. Ryan sat beside her, saying little, but his presence had changed. The distance that once lingered between them was gone. As for Patricia, she didn't resume her unfinished speech. She remained silent, occasionally glancing toward Elena, not with judgment anymore, but with something harder to define. That night didn't end in an argument. No one won, and no one lost. Only one thing had changed, the way a person was seen. And sometimes your true value isn't in what you say, but in the moment you choose not to stay silent anymore. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. In a world full of endless content, the time you spent listening truly means a lot. If this story made you think, or if you've ever experienced something similar, consider subscribing to follow along for more stories like this.